No, actually.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us at our very first panel of the day. This is Dr. Tobias Van Veen. I'm Dr. Pavi Prasad, and we initially, when we started talking about this conference, we wanted it to be as broad and inclusive as possible in thinking about futurity and racial formations in this current moment. And so we've invited as many artists and scholars as we could, and who are able to come to speak to us today about these issues that are pressing to all of us as scholars, as students, as artists, and people who are traversing many worlds at once. So thank you for being here and for getting us started on our conversation. Bye.
I think that covers the scope really well. We have some guest speakers for this afternoon, including Valerie Thomas from Pomona, Nala Hopkinson from Riverside, the Canadian Trinidadian science fiction writer, Ronaldo Anderson, who will be speaking after this panel, Beatriz Cortez and Marton Robinson. So yeah, it's been really wonderful bringing these people together. And this event is kind of, in a way, a sister or brotherly or family event to the Black Speculative Art Movement events, which are going on across the United States and Canada, including one coming up in Los Angeles in June, I believe June 24th. So yeah, these are events bringing together artists, activists, academics who are working around questions of race, speculative cultural production, science fiction, and questions of futurism and like utopia, dreaming alternate worlds. There's kind of an underlying thesis here that we need to imagine and dream other possibilities to the kind of world in which we currently inhabit, and we specifically and especially need to address questions of race, but also gender, class, etc., questions of privilege within rethinking new worlds and new models. So this really requires bringing together different kinds of people from all kinds of different praxis. So some of the terms that get floated around are like Afrofuturism would be a big one, but that's just sort of one kind of grouping. I mean, we're talking about really a broader kinds of futurism that bring in questions of race. So we're thinking now more around questions of speculative futurism. So yeah, we have massive thanks to the Department of Communications, to the chair, Catherine, to Pavi, who's been here on the ground. I'm just a visiting scholar who has come in from Canada for this. All the supporting departments and organizations, which we should read out, because
I will let you know the main players, yes,
yeah,
who have supported our vision in making this happen, particularly because futurism across disciplines is talking about or imagining futures where the current geopolitical realities may not be what we want in the future, right? So in the spirit of that interdisciplinary and trans-border scholarship, we are very grateful for the support that has come to us from all across the campus, from the Department of Communication Studies, the Associated Students, Mike Curb College of Arts, Media, and Communication, the Office of Research and Graduate Studies, the Division of Student Affairs, Civil Discourse and Social Change, College of Humanities, the Department of Art, Department of Central American Studies, Department of Sociology, Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, Department of Africana Studies, the Oviatt Library, the Department of Asian American Studies, Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies Program, and the Department of Religious Studies.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you
mad
all.
thanks
Yes.
to these departments. This is,
So thank you all, welcome, and I will turn this over to our first panelists here. Our artists panel that's going to start our symposium features Beatriz Cortez and Marton Robinson. Beatriz is a writer and an artist. She was born in El Salvador and has lived in the US since 1989. And her work explores simultaneity and the existence in different temporalities and different versions of modernity in relation to memory and loss in the aftermath of war. So she's going to talk to us about her work, which is currently on exhibit, or is opening soon on May 6th, the Saturday, at the Orange County Museum of Art. The California Pacific Triennial will be where you can see Beatriz's artwork locally in LA. So please welcome Beatriz.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this interdisciplinary, multicultural, wonderful event. In particular, I would like to thank Dr. Pavitra Prasad, Dr. Tobias Van Veen, Dr. Catherine Sorrells, the chair of the department, and the Department of Communication Studies for this invitation. It's also a great pleasure for me to share this panel with Marton Robinson, and I'm really excited about having this dialogue, and I hope he has a wonderful time and that he continues to visit our university in the next semesters to come. We're very excited about him being in Los Angeles for a little while. Or forever, maybe, who knows? In general terms, like Dr. Pavitra Prasad was saying, my work is about the memory of growing up in El Salvador, where I lived for 11 of the 12-year war, and for the first almost 19 years of my life. And my work is greatly impacted by my own history of migration. I'm just going to leave this timer here for me to not go. And my own experiences as I moved first to Arizona, where I lived for 11 years before coming to Los Angeles in 2000 via Detroit. But my work is also about the experience of simultaneity, of living in two places at once, San Salvador and Los Angeles, and existing in two or more but different versions of modernity, in two different cultural mind frames, moving back and forth within different technologies. And more importantly, my work is about the future. I build memories so I can imagine possible futures. Because of this, there are three concepts that are central to my work: time, simultaneity, and movement. And I'm interested in how other issues such as race, class, migration, or gender intercept or cut through those concepts. Time has become such a central concept in my work. And looking back, it has been a constant in my thinking, sometimes consciously and sometimes not. For instance, I didn't know this then, but when I reconstructed my childhood bedroom to make a video piece, you can see a still from it here, my objective was to construct memory, to revisit a place that had been taken from me, but also to talk about the passing of time and about the lushness of life that continues moving forward. Once I had completed the piece, I was able to see that I had inserted there a couple of things from my present that could not possibly be in my past. My parrot's cage that you see there on the right, and images of Bishop Romero that one couldn't have in one's wall during the time of war. In other words, I had made an intervention in the chronological order of time. When I built a sculpture with soil and seeds that was meant to honor the unknown dead who have been thrown like trash in war and migration, and I watered it every day, in the back of sculpture going towards Plummer here on campus, I watered it until it became a garden. I did not realize that I was honoring someone who was not there at the moment. That is, that I was crossing barriers of time and space, and I was already playing with the concept of the untimely. I have built installations with books, installations that were about the memory of living in the war, about censorship, about violence, and about living in fear. I began burning books and burying books, as people did with their own books during the war in El Salvador, so that they wouldn't become targets of the violence. But I built those installations with the books that I have today in my library, and I hid the books that I thought would be banned today if the war happened in our own context. And when I built an armor made of steel for Rufina Maya, a woman who was the only survivor of a massacre that happened in 1981 in the town of El Mozote in El Salvador. A day after I turned 10, I wanted to protect her in 1982 when she really needed the armor, and I wasn't able to make her one. And I wanted to protect her memory, even though she's no longer here, and her testimonies continue unfolding through YouTube today and without my help. And so the ability to intervene in the chronological order of time became important in my work. And I'm interested in multiple conceptual understandings of time, new philosophical ideas such as speculative realism, ideas about the posthuman, philosophies of extinction invite us to consider the impositions of seeing humanism, liberalism, the Enlightenment as the only way, a colonial way to understand reason, and with it to understand time. So striving to find other alternatives, particularly ones that can coexist with a multicultural reality of my own experience as a Central American, as a Salvadoran artist, I have become interested in paying attention to other understandings of reason and other understandings of time, such as the Maya long and short counts of time, which are circular conceptual constructions of time and are multiple and simultaneous. And I became interested in finding possible ways in which multiple understandings of reason and of time could be expressed through cultural production, through architecture, and especially through sculpture. Here, this is a time machine. When I built the time machine, I was interested in simultaneity and in making the city of Los Angeles and the city of San Salvador with the same light. So I projected a video of the city of Los Angeles viewed from Griffith Park, and you can see the observatory there at the bottom, in case those of you who go hiking could recognize it. So I projected the video of Los Angeles from Griffith Park on the exterior panel, and I opened thousands of holes with different drill bits that allowed me to create a video with rudimentary technology for the night view of San Salvador in the interior space of the installation. And inside there's a swing in this piece, so you can swing inside, and your own movement is what gives movement to the interior part of the view of San Salvador outdoors at night, which is inside the piece, and the view of Los Angeles outdoor in daytime is what you see in the piece outside. I also began thinking about different versions of technologies that are operating at once, and that as an immigrant, you have to move back and forth from those different versions of modernity, of technology, different contexts, different narratives, and you're really crossing through time. And I began making fortune teller machines. The first one I made, which is this one, was in collaboration with an indigenous Cachiquel collective in the town of Patsicia in Guatemala. We have been working together for years on several projects, and I asked them if what they wanted for their future, what were their dreams for the future, and I programmed their desires onto this machine by using an Arduino microchip inside the machine that's connected to a thermal printer that prints those tickets once you press that button. It also has a motion detector that makes the bird chirp and move the tail when you get close to it. When you press the button, you get a ticket that says, when the future comes, there will be no genocide, for example. When the future comes, we will not be humiliated. And I realized that a lot of their desires were in the negative, which talks about their particular context and the precariousness of their experiences. Then I made the Nomad edition of the fortune teller machine. For this machine, I interviewed a group of immigrants, and I asked them to give me their desires for the future. And that box prints tickets that say things like, when the future comes, we will have met our relatives in person. This piece that was earlier this year on display at the Vincent Price Art Museum in a show called Nomad World. This fortune teller is based on the idea that words have power and that one can will the future into being, and following some of the proposals on nomadism by Italian philosopher Rossi Braidotti. It poses an invitation to a collective becoming, to future collective nomadic subjectivities that are made possible in the present through language, through the use of the future perfect tense, a tense that creates a possible collective nomadic subjectivity. This is an image from The Beast, a pinball machine that I also made for that show, Nomad World. As I was searching for philosophical possibilities out of traditional liberal thought, traditional humanism, queer theory gave me the possibility to explore a space of undefined subjectivities, a space of blurriness and undefinition that I found to be a perfect fit for the space of the immigrant. I became fascinated with the philosophers of the Deleuzian genealogy, that is, philosophers whose option was not a post-colonial option because I was more interested in blurred identities, undefined identities, but also in movement. Spinoza, Deleuze, Haraway, Braidotti, Barat, Colebrook, Peter Osborne gave me options that made me excited, and I began to investigate their ideas through my work. One of the philosophers who has impacted my understanding of time is Peter Osborne, because he questions the concept of modernity as a way to establish a chronology and also as a universal narrative of modernity. He argues that the effort to establish a narrative about modernity towards progress, towards development, is also a colonial and homogenizing effort to erase diversity. So rather than a chronology, Osborne is interested in the exploration of different modernities coexisting simultaneously. So thinking about this, I began rebuilding pinball machines. Here you can see the play field in The Beast, a pinball machine that when I bought it originally was just a board, and it was called the Black Pyramid. It was an old abandoned playfield board with both mechanical and I rebuilt with also inserting Arduino technology. So you can see over here at the bottom that I have soldered a relay board and an Arduino microchip that controls the lights and some of the buttons, but also I have removed the sound so that you can hear the mechanical operation of the machine. And I began making these machines that had one crumbling modernity underneath and at the same time a new version of modernity on top, both visible. The Beast is a machine with a circular logic where a ball traverses a field marked by the obstacles of immigration. And as much as the person playing attempts to keep the ball in the field, it is eventually expelled or deported from the field. But the machine is there in the Nomad World exhibition, ready for another try, free of charge. And so the spectators continue to send the ball in and collaborate collectively in keeping the ball in the play field, one effort at a time. All the pieces in that installation are about simultaneous realities, about coexisting in two or more places at once. And so the jukebox plays soundscapes from Central America, sounds that allow us to go back in time, to move in space, to travel to another reality in spite of migratory impediments, in spite of borders, of economic hardships and other realities. So the jukebox then plays sounds of, for example, the popsicle salesperson saying, "Vaya las paletas," or the guy with the megaphone announcing the circus. They're all recorded in San Salvador. I recorded them all there. You can hear the sounds of the parakeets going by at 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So recreating the experience of being in another place. And then, of course, the installation included a photo booth. And this photo booth began as a project for undocumented immigrants in my mind, who were unable to go back home like everyone else and take selfies and photos in all kinds of places in Central America and Mexico and share them on social media. That is the virtual space that links together our divided families and our divided lives. But seeing the public play with the photo booth has also brought me to realize that it not only can help us be in two places at once, in East Los Angeles and in the street where I grew up in San Salvador, which was called Pasaje Los Angeles, in Antigua, Guatemala, or in Los Angeles, or in Tegucigalpa, but also invited people to play. Art like play allows us to experiment with different ideas about space and time. We can jump through different moments in time, exist in different spaces at once, move around, be faster, be slower, and so forth. But let's keep moving along. Let's see how much time I have. I want to talk about this installation that was called the Cosmos. I began thinking about immigration as part of my past, but also the cosmos as part of my future, and the idea that we could fragment our identity, that we could imagine becoming other, that being an immigrant means that you can be here and imagine becoming collectively with other people that are also here, another you or many versions of yourself, or following Braidotti to imagine death as a future that is a way to be part of another becoming, and not death as a terminal thing that is part of a trauma that I brought with me from the war, but death as part of a future that allows us to become part of the cosmos. Cosmic dust. My installation, The Cosmos, was about the fragmentation of identity and future becomings. Moving light at light speed through the gallery. And this is the box of untimely conversations. It included the box of untimely conversations, which invites us to imagine death in a different way because it allows us to break the time and space barrier. And instead of getting a fortune, we can get a quote by someone written in another time or another space, and we can continue that conversation with them. So in this case, you will never be a nomad. You will only be able to continue trying to be nomadic, was a quote by Rosie Braidotti. My favorite was by Donna Haraway, the best machines are made of sunshine. There were quotes there by Bob Marley. In this great future, you can't forget your past. There were quotes there by Roque Dalton, by Roberto Bolaño, who are two of my favorite authors. There were quotes by Deleuze and by Guattari, by Spinoza, Nietzsche, and other philosophers. So we can continue this conversation with them. And of course, it also means that we can have a conversation with other people who haven't been born yet in the future when we're dead. And so then I began working on other installations that were in conversation with the cosmos. As you can see, this installation, even though it's a black mirror, is definitely evoking the spaceship in the cosmos. And yet, even though it was about fragmenting identity, it was also about labor. This installation I built in Cerritos College. It was titled Your Life Work. And it was a result of my residency there, working in the auto body shop. It carried my reflections about time and about labor, as well as vocational school, and the way vocational school shaped dreams, and the way it determines how a student would imagine his or her future. In the black mirror, I shaped a geodesic dome structure made with hexagons and pentagons formed with curved steel, because in the auto body shop, we had vintage machines that would allow me to curve the metal by foot. And, you know, even though I was basically creating custom car parts, they were all designed by me, and they were all made with industrial sheet metal, and they were turned into this structure that was then painted and finished with black automotive paint. And in this way, I was able to build Black Mirror, one that existed at once inside and outside modernity, one that evoked black obsidian mosaics and industrial constructions at once. In the label, I invited the viewer to consider this black mirror as a way to predict one's destiny, as Mesoamerican cultures in ancient times had considered such mosaic dark mirrors as portals to other worlds. The aptitude test box, which grew rusty as the exhibition evolved because it was unsealed metal, and as people left their fingerprints, they began to rust, reproduced the text that I had removed from historic vocational school videos, and invited the viewer to imagine his or her future within the confines allowed only by Vocational Education Act of 1917, the industrialized workforce, and the neoliberal policies of today. This same text was also placed as a sound installation in the interior of the dome. It was basically trapped inside the dome. But it said things like, if you don't mind the grease, you could be an electrician. If you dedicate yourself, you could own your own shop. If you gain experience, you could be a supervisor in a welding shop. So it invited people to imagine themselves only within the confines of vocational school, whereas the Black Mirror invited you to see yourself fragmented into pieces, moving through space, and imagine anything possible. So I became interested in the possibility of making visible the many new and old circulating and recirculating types of modernities that are part of my realm, the obsolete modernities that become new, and more importantly, the way that being an immigrant forced me to move from one to another type of modernity, back and forth, and also to coexist within them in a simultaneous fashion. Claire Colebrook talks about extinction, about a future after humans, a non-human geologist of the future who will read our mark on the planet. This non-human geologist, she says, and I imagine one of those rovers moving through Mars, of the future will read the sedimentation layers, will read the rocks and the stones for traces of the Anthropocene, for traces of the human. Reading her work on extinction, lava came back to my mind as a material that could confuse this geologist of the future, that would blur the records, but more importantly, that would break the chronological order of time. And I imagine the volcano making fun of these geologists of the future, erupting all the time and changing the chronological order of time, basically spitting the past onto the future and confusing the chronological order. And so the lava from the past spit out by this volcano changes the order of the layers that write the temporal history of our passing through the earth. And this is how I began to explore different ways in which matter breaks chronology. And I built Cairn. It's outside the Brand Library in Glendale, but right now it's also at the Whitney Museum of Art at the Whitney Biennial, because Los Angeles artist Rafa Esparza, who was included in the Whitney Biennial, decided to build a communal space and invite other artists from LA and from Mexico to be part of his own installation. And that's how Cairn ended up at the Whitney. So if you happen to go to New York, please go visit Cairn over there. It was a mound of stone serving as a landmark. Indigenous peoples have built cairns for centuries to mark the way on a trail, to mark sacred ground, to mark a burial ground, or other forms of landmarks. Within modernity, a cairn is often used to delineate private property, to mark the location of the post office, to trace the border between two nations. We can see one every mile within the border between the United States and Mexico. At the turn of the 20th century in Los Angeles, this indigenous way of building with river rocks was often used to build craftsman and Spanish colonial revival houses in what came to be known as a vernacular style of construction. It was an ancient form of construction applied to a modern architectural style. It was a syncretic way of building within and outside modernity. And so Marcador, later on, this is the version that's right now inside Rafa Esparza's piece, Beyond the White Field. And those are his adobe bricks and his adobe floor. And there are 5 other artists here in this small installation within that circle. Also in Ecuador, I built a mound called Marcador, another one of these pieces that was made with lava from the Cotopaxi volcano in Ecuador. And I also became interested in the way that this lava, this underground river of lava, bounds the 2 homes, my 2 homes. And so I began exploring this and the construction of this LA vernacular style of construction that illustrates our coexistence with colonial aesthetics, with indigenous aesthetics, and with craftsman styles of construction, but also imagining a futuristic construction of a space capsule. And because I'm running out of time, I'm just going to tell you very briefly that this is part of an installation that I'm building for the California Museum of Photography in Riverside, where during Pacific Standard Time, there's going to be a show called Mundos Alternos, Art and Science Fiction in the Americas. So that's going to open in September. I believe it's September 15th or 16th. And I'm building an installation inspired by Dan Montelongo's work, which these are the cairns that are part of the Stonehurst district in Stoneland. And there's 93 of his houses surviving in that area. But he also made the houses that are next to mine. And so I'm making, for the California Pacific Triennial, a porch that imagines a time without all these materials, without stone, without wood, without the things that would make a craftsman style home, but everything is made with steel. However, it's evoking Dan Montelongo's construction. So these are some of the test versions of that piece that is right now being installed at the Orange County Museum of Art. So I'm going to stop here because I want to hear Marton, but we can talk afterwards more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you. Do a transition?
No,
Sure.
All right, so please welcome Marton Robinson, everyone. And he is joining us from the University of Southern California. And his work explores ways of challenging conventional Black representations of identity and ethnicity in a variety of disciplines. His work can be seen locally as well at the Vincent Price Museum. The exhibition is called A Decolonial Atlas, and it opens Saturday, April 22nd. Please welcome Marton.
Bueno, buenos días. Gracias por estar acá hoy todos ustedes. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer a la Escuela de Comunicación, a Beatriz, Tobías y a... Perdón. No sé, quiero introducir un poco mi trabajo. Mi trabajo toca tres temas principalmente.
Wait, are you going to speak in Spanish?
Gracias. Thank you. That was kind of my introduction somehow. My work kind of deals with three main ideas. One of my ideas is the colonial ideas, and I think it's very important, and I've been invited like many times to conference, and people are kind of force me to speak in English. I do speak English, but my main language is Spanish. So I kind of like to play with this idea of breaking those structures of power somehow. And another way I'm doing it here in LA is kind of like at ATMs. I piss people off by using ATM in Spanish. I think you all should try to use the ATM and all these conventional machines, which are usually in English, try to use them in other language and see how people react to it somehow. So that's kind of where I'm trying to go with my work, or the ways I explore my work. I'm not going to be as thorough and as specific as Beatriz, because I can't go there. But I'm going to try to explain somehow my work. So I want to start with this kind of like phrase. This is from Clodito Picado. It's 1939, and this was in the national newspaper in Costa Rica around that time. Clodito Picado is, let's say, one of the most relevant scientific in Costa Rica around that time. He's the one who started the investigation with penicillin. So he's kind of like known for this, for studies with penicillin and kind of like science in general in Costa Rica. So I think that the phrase is very clear somehow. His idea is an idea which is based on an Eurocentric idea, which is kind of part of the, let's say, the way the identity of Costa Rica is constructed. It's constructed onto this idea of Eurocentric idea that most of Costa Rican are descendants from European countries. So there is a denial of the others in the terms of we are white and the others are color. So this is very interesting in terms of Costa Rica in the way it functions, because Salvador, Nicaragua, or Panama, we haven't been in like a civil war, or we don't have a notion of war, but we don't have an army. So a lot of people consider us the Swiss of Central America. This is going to be the start to the idea of being the white Central America somehow. If you compare us towards Nicaragua or Panama, Costa Rica somehow are the lightest skin. So this gonna make it complicated in terms of living in Costa Rica and how you identify yourself. If you're constantly just seeing in media reproduction of whiteness or this idea of whiteness somehow. So, for example, this is a work which is a series which named Money Talk, and what I kind of do is like try to see what's the history behind money, currency, and how currency works in terms of not only as a value, but also as an ideology, and how that ideology could infiltrate, it could sort of like, somehow it's like a geographical way to spread around, I would say. Because even though we don't have like a strong white supremacist in Costa Rica, there are certain ideas of white supremacists in Costa Rica. There is a monument for the Nazi party built in Costa Rica around 1939. Which was built close to the main fountain of water that served the valley. So all these ideologies are kind of like infiltrated in a culture which is not considered racist or not considered somehow biased towards racism, to a race somehow. So this was actually a bill which commemorate Lorito Picao. So what I kind of do with this was, he's the one with the snake and sort of like the medical best, because that's penicillin. The studies of penicillin are from snakes somehow. So what I kind of did was just kind of did this simple collage and investing with this sort of like a white supremacist Ku Klux Klan cake somehow. And this is somehow how I try to break the narrative of our history in Costa Rica by inserting sort of myself or inserting other discourse within the, let's say, the classical or established discourse. So this is part of that series also, Money Talk, and this is untitled. So this is actually a bill. It's not in circulation in Costa Rica, but it's having like an historical value in the sense that the bill is paint on the ceiling of the National Theater. So if we kind of go back, like the way colonialism established in the Americas was towards this idea of bringing culture. So the way to bring culture is having a theater in the jungle. So the first thing they did was paint the scene of Costa Rica. And this is during the time where Costa Rica started producing or exporting coffee to the world. So the build has been considered one of the most beautiful builds in the world. And maybe we could see is the one on the top. And it's been considered one of the most beautiful builds in the world because of the aesthetic of it, because of the painting. And it have a lot of inconsistencies. Like, for example, the main product of Costa Rica during that time was coffee. And it is portrayed to be growing on the coast. You don't grow coffee on the coast. So the other inconsistency of the bill is in terms of this guy here. The way he holding the bunch of bananas, if he hold it that way, all the banana will fall apart because of gravity. So that's another inconsistency in the bill. And of course, there is no black people portrayed in the bill. And this is taking place in Limon, which is let's say the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, in which it's predominantly black population out there. So even though during this period there was a lot of black people in Costa Rica, there was this kind of denying of the existence of black people. And what I try to do is kind of like insert myself, and that's kind of how I started or try to pursue my work somehow. I noticed that there was a lack of representation in museum, a lack of representation in newspaper. So for me, it was important to insert myself within that discourse, within the discourse of the museums and the galleries. And what I did was just take objects that I found in Costa Rica. These are like salts. Like for salt, it's just like tiny figurines, like table figurines that they use for salt. And again, it's kind of reflect all this idea of the utilitarian, black people as utilitarian, and insert this off somehow. So I tried to take those objects that I found in Costa Rica and just insert them in a way to play with this idea of, yeah, we're not racist, but we have all this object and figurine and representation that might target racists, but we can't see somehow. We just can't get, or we just can't somehow be empathic with them. Another way in which I tried to insert myself in this discourse was through this thing. This is the name of it is the whitening of the blood. And it kind of played with the reference I showed at the beginning with this idea of Costa Rican being getting black and contaminated with a black blood. And also with pseudoscience ideas of, in reference of if a black family wants to become white, it have to pass 4 generations to be considered somehow white. So I kind of like this work because I think it's gonna reflect a lot in terms of the speculative future race, especially here in America. Because I think a part of the issue of race in America, the way I see it, I think it has to do with power. So I think people are afraid of losing the power of becoming a minority. White people are afraid of becoming a minority. And if the country keep mixing somehow, it would be the white people would become a minority and somehow lose their power. I think I believe that's what people are afraid of in that sense. So the idea of giving you an option to become white, it's kind of like try to accept you within this speech of differences. You're the other, but you could become part of us if you just try to cater to our taste somehow. So what I did with this piece was there's a silk screen, and I printed out with semen and blood. So the idea of this is kind of like I went from more semen to more blood. Kind of like breaking that chronological that Beatriz was talking about in the sense of time. And not only time, but that invisibility that we go through in Costa Rica and that's not being seen and try to deny that at the same time in the sense that this is an organic component. And eventually, even though if it's just semen and clear, eventually it have my trace. And it could be traced as a black person. So that's kind of the way I try to insert myself within the museum in this discourse of genetics. Another way I kind of like to break the discourse or narrative is through objects. And again, I work with archive and archiving objects and images. And these are jelly niggers. I'm pretty sure people are familiar with jelly niggers in Costa Rica. You could also get them in Costa Rica. So that's kind of what I like to talk about or make reference in the sense that even though these are artifacts that were built for an American population and consumer, they spread all over the world. They spread all over the world. They spread over to Central America, and the way people engage with them, it's different on the way people engage with them in America now. So what I did with this piece is I can embed them with the Costa Rica typical costume somehow. And I play with the name Ticos. As a Costa Rican, you call Ticos. That's the way they call Ticos in Central America. Costa Rican Ticos. So Ticos is kind of the way Costa Rican would try to refer to you if you're black, because they have a hard time to call you black. They think it's rude. So in a way for them to make it nicer, they would say like little black and diminish the name somehow. So idea of diminishing the blackness somehow and the narrative. So if you're all familiar with Jolly Niggers, you might also have to relate with cake dance. So cake dance is this dance that was performed by a slave for their masters, in which they will give them the old clothes, and they will put on the frack and all the ties and all the suits and dance for them in parties. So that's kind of what I'm playing here. I'm kind of trying to invest the object with this idea of nationality somehow. Try to invest them one more time and try to play with that idea of being Costa Rican. And at the same time, the object is have an audio of a story of my grandfather. My grandparents are from Jamaica. I'm the third generation of Jamaican and Costa Rican. And he told me this story that when cruises were kind of like arrived to the coast of Jamaica, like kids will swim over to the cruise and try to catch coin that the tourists would throw to them with their mouth. And I don't know why I stick to this story for a long time. And then I kind of related to this because the Jolly Niggers are actually piggy banks. And they have this idea of eating coins. So I'm not sure if this relationship have something to do, but for me, it's kind of like give me kind of like an artistic, how you would say, license to create my own narrative, to create my own story somehow, and relate it somehow to myself. There are some images of it. They're kind of pixelated. And another way I try to break narrative and history, again, is with objects and kind of playing with syncretism. So this is the procession of St. Martin. So St. Martin de Porres is considered the first black saint. And I kind of find it interesting, the whole story or the idea of St. Martin de Porres, in the sense that even though there was already a saint which were related to animals, San Francisco de Assis, if I'm not mistaken, St. Martin de Porres is also related with animals, but in a different way. He were able to talk with animals and conceal animals. So this idea of being related to, in a sort of like in a line with animal, have this colonial idea of bestiality or the idea of the el buen salvaje, the good savage somehow. So I cannot play with that idea, and in a way that, for me, the other gift, or how you would say this, the other power that St. Martin have is being in two places at the same time, which for me is totally related to voodoo. So that was kind of the way for Christianity to cater to Black people during that time. So what I did with this was kind of like just play with a figure and eventually just kind of go towards that bestiality in which Black males sometimes are related, or the masculinity which Black male are related to in most of the cases. So what I did with this piece was literally just take the scene, it's made out of wax, and just mold it with my hand until I get to the figure somehow. That's another view of that. I could talk about this. This is the piece that's going to be part of the Vincent Price Museum. So this is part of Money Talk as well. So I'm not sure how many of y'all heard about John Hanson. Anybody know if the first Black president of the United States? Who was the first Black president? Really? Are you sure? Who said Obama? You did? Are you sure? No. John Hanson? No one ever heard about John Hanson? Someone wants to Google John Hanson? No? So there's if you all Google John Hanson, there's all this myth surrounding the $2 bill. So first of all, the $2 bill is still in circulation. A lot of people think it's not in circulation. So one of the myths is that it's not in circulation because there is a Black character in the bill. So people don't want to deal with the bill because they're a Black character. The Black character people talk about is John Hanson. If you search for John Hanson, supposedly John Hanson was part of the committee that signed the Declaration of Independence. So if you look at the bill, and in the illustration of the bill, there's one character that seems to have a different tone of skin. And supposedly John Hanson, before they signed the Declaration of Independence, was the one in charge of what was considered the United States. So let's say theoretically, he was the first president of the United States. But here, this is where it comes interesting. So what I do is kind of like play with that myth that is online, and all this is just lie. You know, I just gonna try to play with this in terms of creating another narrative and try to see how far people go with it. Because if you look online, you will even find a picture of him. And if you're smart enough, there can be a picture of this period. Oh, you have a $2 bill. I can show you.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of the idea behind this. And yeah, I would say that's it. I try to fit in as much as I could. And then I also work with videos, video performance. And this is a video performance which deals with popular stereotypes in a way. And for me, being from Costa Rica and from the Caribbean side of Costa Rica somehow, like there is this kind of like I call it kind of like a effective method of illustrating Black people in the Caribbean, which is always associated with watermelon. So you have the Black figure, watermelons. So for me was this idea of, okay, so let's fuck the stereotype and just get rid of it somehow. So what I did is kind of like finger the stereotype, just smash it, and just eat it in a way of trying to embrace myself, empower myself through the action somehow. And then this is another video, Bro Two Shoes. Not sure if you're all familiar with Mommy Two Shoes, Tom and Jerry. So Tom and Jerry is very popular in Latin America. So this is something I've been seeing since I'm a kid. And for me, there was always this association with the mommy figure and never seen her upper body. And it's kind of relate to myself. And I think somehow I end up studying physical education because people kind of force me to it because I was good in sport. Oh, you're good as a teacher, you're good in sport. So I end up studying physical education. So for me, there was this relationship in terms of how society kind of force you or try to target you to do stuff because of your race or because of your phenotype or, I don't know, genetics somehow. And that was a play on it in which I kind of like this 2-channel video in which I portrayed in different sports while the mommy is doing her activities at the kitchen. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Even though we're a little bit behind, I'd like to invite you all to have a little conversation with our artists, and we might be able to take about 5 minutes or so to take some questions or comments.
That was great.
It's a beer. Anyway. Yes.
I apologize for being a little late, and so I'm just curious. I mean, I see the images, I see the themes that you're working with, and they're very similar to the history and themes of African Americans working in art and imagery. And so I just wonder if you talked about that a little bit, about being Costa Rican. And I don't know how long you've been here, so I don't know how you relate to the experience of appearing African American, if you do, in America, and how you answer, you know, how there's such similar things in your work.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do believe we share a lot. Like the dynamics are the same. Systematically, it's just the same. But I would say it's kind of different for me being in Costa Rica and in the US. If I'm in Costa Rica, I know for a fact that I would be fresh at least twice a week. So over here, I still feel some tension, but it's not as much as the tension I will feel out there because there are not much Black people. So if there are not much of them out there, so you are in a position in which you're gonna get frisked more often. So that dynamic I could still see, but in a different way. I know how to act towards that dynamic in Costa Rica, but I don't think I would know how to act
In the central part of Costa Rica.
in the central part of Costa Rica, exactly.
Not in the Caribbean.
Not in the Caribbean. Yeah, in the Valley, in the capital, San Jose. Let's put it that way.
And that's because there's more Black people in the Caribbean part?
Yeah, or the idea there is more Black people in the Caribbean part, which is a lie. Because actually, like the most amount of Black people in Costa Rica is in the Valley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, but it's this idea of Blackness just in the Caribbean, and it's kind of like fundamented by supposedly a law that was established in around 1930s, in which Black people couldn't pass through the valley to get to the Pacific coast.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of like a measurement for keeping the production and people who were working in the Caribbean, and supposedly giving access to people who lives in the Pacific to be in charge of the production of the Pacific. So they tried to keep them in the Caribbean, and that can enforce this idea that Blackness is only in the Caribbean, not in the Central Valley. So yeah, so it's a different dynamics for sure. But I do relate a lot. And especially being Latino, I can relate also with the Latino, Black. So it's an interesting mixture of ideas that come in terms of my work, I would say.
So do you look at African American artists' work?
I do. I do. But being here in LA, I do appreciate looking more at Latin American artists somehow. Yeah, I kind of feel more at home, more related somehow in terms of the decolonial ideas and having it clear somehow, or coming from a position in which you're working with almost nothing to create stuff. And so that's gonna create another environment, I would say.
Other questions or comments?
I have something that I'd like to say.
You have something back there?
Sure.
You have two then. Go ahead.
For Beatriz, your work, I thought it was really awesome, studying like transnationalism. And I never thought to it's always there in terms of time, but I never thought to sort of imagine or play with the idea of bringing geographies together, not just like space, but also time. And that's what their work is now. That's what they did. That's just really awesome. I actually went to Costa Rica like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And
We're in Costa Rica.
sorry,
We're in Costa Rica.
San Jose.
Yeah.
So we went to the central, to the center, but we were a little off. It was for a conference. But I'm doing like ethnometry queer nightlife. So your work is kind of bringing up those sorts of questions, like how is time also a part of this?
Yeah, I thought when I was watching Marton's presentation, I thought it's kind of interesting how connected our presentations are, because he's making speculative interventions in time, imagining another Costa Rica where Black peoples are being celebrated and they're placed in the national symbolic, in the national symbols of capitalism and the nation, right? And, so like all these interventions, I think in a way are imagining different futures, but imagining different pasts and imagining this movement that I think is really interesting way of also addressing migration.
Can you expand more on chronological? I like the way you explain it.
About the volcano?
No, chronological time in your work.
Yeah, changing that chronology.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I find a lot of relationship in terms of that in your work. So I would like to explain some more in terms of how it works.
The chronology?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there's some colonial way of imagining time that's chronological, but if you imagine time as multiple chronologies happening at once, or other ways of imagining time in circular forms, then we're not all moving towards progress, because progress doesn't belong to us. And I don't want to move that way. I want to move towards something else. And so there's something really beautiful about paying attention to the fact that volcanoes and the world is breaking the chronology and is irrespecting that Eurocentric chronology that is being imposed as universal and ruining it. Because in the end, there won't be books, there will be rocks. And the rocks will ruin the chronology. And so it makes me feel better. Anyway.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We actually have to end so we can transition to our next speaker. But thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quiero que conozcas a mi colega Silvia, que está por allá, que ella es de Costa Rica y trabaja en nuestro departamento. I love your food. Thank you so much. Thank you. Ask your question.
Oh wow. All right.
Mira, ella es Celia. Y entonces ella. Hola, ¿cómo están? Tienen que venir a visitarnos.
La cara que
Tiene pinta. Thank you so much.
Which I was kind of afraid to ask, but since you asked me,
Because the idea is that this is Jennifer, by the way. She's one of our students.
Nice to meet you.
Marton, and this is Professor Celia.
I wanted to ask you.
And you too.
Yeah, that's gonna be
Did you get a parking pass?
I didn't get a parking pass. Yeah.
My dad didn't let me be an artist for a long time.
My mom wanted me to be
What happened is I went to the gate that's right off Nordhoff.
Oh yeah, no, the one that the hospital waiting you go past the gate entrance to the campus.
The one on St. Prairie. Okay, so when I went to that one, I just didn't notice that. I didn't know. Maybe I just passed it, but I didn't notice a place to stop.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the guy at the first place I stopped said that he should have listened.
Yeah, it's kind of like
It came out.
it came out. It
Well,
just crazy.
I started as a photographer,
No, he knew me.
and I love
So
art,
I
and
just
that's always
parked.
a big
I
part
was like, I'll
of
deal
my
with it
life.
later.
But my parents are like,
Because,
something
yeah,
that
we
you can
had-
make money off of, and I was like, fine, I'll
Yeah.
study history, and then
You know what's
So
funny about
it's
that?
like,
That
yeah.
my dad used to say, you can't be an artist, and then we all migrated from El Salvador, and then
Yes.
looked kind of.
So it's
Bored.
actually
And I was like, why don't you guys go back to school? You never finished school because they had never had a chance to finish college. And then my dad studied painting and he became an artist. And so he couldn't imagine being an artist in El Salvador, which
Right.
to me is
Well,
really
no, it's
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it.
Hey, how are you?
I was also
I know, and I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad to see you.
I think that's also was part of it. Like, what I wanted to bring, there was no way to find something
nice to have everyone here.
Everybody was
I want you to get it ticket.
people play, so I didn't
cool, that's inspiring. Maybe I can find a way to do that for myself. You know, that's pretty cool. Like, there's no excuses here. You know, I feel like here there's so many possibilities.
Or, you know, you could send us a ticket.
doing this and
Okay, but,
Well, I think
yeah,
every
better
Saturday,
to
what's the
avoid.
hardest thing? 500.
But Marton, you have to come visit next semester our department.
Combining all.
Yeah, because next semester I'm going to be teaching the course on Central American art.
I could talk to you for the stretch of those.
Yeah.
The what?
The stretch of those.
There's a time when we discuss that essay. I have so many.
Yeah. No.
Okay, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, let's do it.
So estás en San Diego.
No, estoy en USC acá en un añito más, así que invítame a todos.
¿Y estás terminando la
No, o sea, es un
Nice.
sí, donde fue a la charla. No sé, creo que venía con grandes expectativas de que iba a ser una
I don't know if my daughter, my students were here.
que quiere uno. Bueno, sé quién es, pero no conozco personalmente, pero antes vino.
Es que ella se función promotora
Sí, no. Exacto.
We have to let him connect.
Y es que ella acaba de sacar un cancionero de Guanacaste, precisamente libeño, ¿no? Porque ahí hay muchas raíces.
También, que era una parte de lo que quería hablar por ahí también, porque es esa negación de que en específico
pero ella la saca. Ella la saca porque ella se considera
yo creo que sí escuché de ese libro.
afromestiza.
Toda la investigación es un poco como lo que pasa con México. La idea es que no hay era un asunto de forma y censo. Porque el censo era como que blanco, mestizo, no es mulatos, ni negros. Entonces, claro, hicieron un censo que vieron a datos negros y se dieron cuenta 1 millón de negros, 1 millón de personas identificadas afrodescendientes.
Pues hasta la misma presidenta Costa Rica tiene relación.
I didn't know that it was that.
Hicieron una
Incluso, pero
ella no quiere que
no, y hicieron, ese sí lo hicieron con presidentes.
Sí,
pero no es suficiente hacer.
No.
es un estudio.
Pero me refiero, hicieron ese con un par de presidentes y literalmente
Llegaron a
y ya me dijeron, usted no puede publicar eso, no puede poner un nombre en ese estudio, eso es una falsa. Entonces, cuando se habla de ese estudio, hay 2 presidentes que no pueden entrar.
Uy, no es
Que están
cierto.
incluidos en ese estudio que
I think they have to start. Let's go.
Ay, Dios.
Pero tu bolsa.
I really wanted to feel for everybody. Christian ministries, it's like, oh wow,
Bring it go.
They almost do it all the time. Everybody. Oh, nice meeting you again. What's your name?
Martin.
What's your whole name?
Robinson.
Martin Robinson. Okay, you're showing that.
No, thank you. Thank you for coming.
And you're gonna be showing him.
Yeah, well, I'm part of a group.
Is that YouTube?
Okay, all